Hello, my name is Chuck Webster. Welcome to my webinar, Wellness Through Workflow. Structured messaging contributes to better patient experience. An alternative title could be Structured Workflow Contributes to Better Patient Experience, but I will be using the specific example of structured messaging. Here's the outline, a little bit about who I am, then this idea called the system behind the smiles, the relationship between patient experience and healthcare workflow, what I call healthcare's workflow wall, and finally, how can structured messaging help? I'm an odd duck. I have a lot of degrees. My mother says I'm killing myself by degree. Medical degree, I also have a master's in industrial engineering where I focused on workflow, usability, productivity. My medical informatics degree was in intelligent systems. And I'm the only pre-med accountancy major I ever met, where I majored in cost management systems and MIS. I did design the first undergraduate degree in medical informatics, and I was chief medical informatics officer for an EHR vendor for over a decade, where I helped the 3 medical practices win the first 3 consecutive HIMSS Davies Award. Okay, I'm extremely active on Twitter, and there's a kind of a virtual drinking game where if someone's at a conference or they read something and it's about workflow or healthcare workflow technology, they tweet about it and they mention me, &WAREFLO, and what we have here is a hashtag, which I've been using for about 4 years, and I also have various social badges. POWHIT, People and Organizations Fixing Workflow with Health IT. And that's kind of a reference to the old Batman show, POWHIT. And so if you tweet about this webinar or during the blab, I hope you'll use POWHIT. And I've got about a half a dozen folks now who are starting to use it. And it's all about the folks in the white hats who are rushing to fix workflow in healthcare. At the top of the hour, join a blab. It's kind of like Google Hangouts and Twitter had a beautiful baby. It's a lot of fun, and all of this, the Wareflow, Blab Workflow, HIT POWHIT, it will be at all of the slides, but works best in Chrome. That's that middle URL, and hope to see you there because you can actually take a seat and tell us a little bit about yourself. And the subject, this is just an example, but the subject is any aspect of healthcare workflow and patient experience. There is this idea, in the hospitality industry, in the hotel industry, luxury hotel industry, where my wife works, and it's called the system behind the smile. So when you arrive at that hotel, you walk in, the bellman greets you by name, you walk to the front desk, you're in your room in 10 minutes, everything works perfectly. All of the staff is well trained, and they can, radar on, antenna up, they can see anything that you need, and it's right there. Well, guess what? There's an incredibly sophisticated system behind the scenes of databases and workflows that make this all possible, and that's the system behind the smiles. The system behind the smiles comes from a book in 1990 called Customers for Life, How to Turn That One-Time Buyer into a Lifetime Customer, by Carl Sewell. And here, this is the only thing I'm going to read word for word, quote-wise. What's needed in restaurants, car dealerships, department stores, and every place else is systems, not just smiles, that guarantee good service. Every business is composed of systems. These systems must work together to create a process that is efficient and responsive to a customer's wants. About 50%, roughly 40 to 60% of customer experience, patient experience, is due to the actual face-to-face or on-the-phone interaction with some staff member or customer service member. But that means that the other 50%, 40 or 60%, is due to things that are not under the control of that front-line staff person. These are the workflows and the systems that are behind the smiles. These are the backroom enterprise transaction systems. When you make a reservation at the hotel, you make a reservation online for the airline, and you go there, the reservation is in place, you get your seat, you get your room. All of that has to work. That is absolutely critical to making sure that the folks on the front of the line can deliver are free to basically live the vision and ideals of their organizations. They can count on these workflows working every time. So, and today, industrial engineers, and I have a master's in industrial engineering, they're changing their name to systems engineering. But when you're a systems engineer and you start talking about improving systems, basically what systems engineers do is they replace every word that is systems with the word workflow. Because as soon as you start talking about workflow, you're starting to talk about actual sequences of things, and there's all kinds of tools to help you improve those workflows. Now, what's the relationship to patient experience? Now, folks are developing mobile apps for patients to interact with, and folks are coming in and doing kind of sophisticated charm schools for the folks that are interacting with the patients. But I'm going to talk about this back-end stuff, but let's start with probably the most famous and prevalent and popular definition of patient experience from the Barrow Institute. The sum of all interactions shaped by an organization's culture that influence patient perceptions across the continuum of care. And if you drill down on each of these 4 areas, Barrow also defines those. So let's take a look at the stuff in the middle here. The organization's culture that influences patient perceptions. That culture is made up of vision and values, which then inform the attitudes and demeanor and training and behavior of that frontline staff interacting with the customer or the patient. The perceptions, that's the other half, that's the patient reacting, saying, oh, I recognize this, I understand this, I remember that. Those are the smiles. The systems is the rest of that definition, the sum of all the interactions across the continuum of care. So if you drill down and grab the description of interactions and the description of continuum of care from the Barrow Institute, put them together, you get this. The orchestrated touch points of people, processes, policies, communications, actions, and environment before, during, and after the delivery of care. The key word here is orchestrated. Orchestration is a very important word. It is an important part of the terminology of the workflow and the workflow technology industry. One way to understand orchestration is to contrast it with choreography. Orchestration implies some sort of central workflow conductor. So you've got the conductor up there, they're waving their wand, and everybody is kind of doing what they're told to do. In software, that's often a workflow engine, which we'll talk about a little bit. But that can also be a human care coordinator who's facilitating these workflows. Choreography is about distributed workflow control. So there is no conductor. It's like a jazz ensemble, and everybody has a set of kind of workflow rules in their heads, and they're watching each other, and they're doing a kind of a dance. Modern workflow systems tend to be hybrids of orchestration and choreography. Some are very much toward orchestration, but they still have some choreography, and some are very much about peer-to-peer choreography of workflows. We have invested tens of billions of dollars in health information technology and electronic health records over the last several decades. And I believe that we have hit what I call the workflow wall. The workflow wall is the invisible workflows. That is, you can't see task status. You don't know what's going on. All these black boxes around us. The inflexible workflows, you can't change them because they're hard-coded into the software. They're ineffective. They're not achieving the goals we need them to achieve. And they are inefficient workflows. That is, they consume too many resources when they are executing. And this has created what I call workflow discontents. If you go to a healthcare industry, or particularly a health IT industry conference, you may see people talking about workflow. It may be in some abstracts. But for sure, when you walk down the hall, you will hear the word workflow. It's like a cocktail party effect where you hear someone mention your name across the room. You walk down the hall, and every 30 seconds, you'll hear workflow, workflow, workflow. And okay, let's say you have a problem. Pollution. You have a pollution problem. Well, guess what? Then you have pollution technology. Well, healthcare has a workflow problem. So we need to use workflow technology. In the academic research realm, the folks who study workflow technology call these process-aware information systems. Process-aware means that there's some kind of model of the process or workflow. And aware basically means not that the software has consciousness, but that it can inspect that model and it can refer to that model and it can reason with that model in order to facilitate and make these invisible workflows visible, flexible, effective, and efficient. Structured messaging is an example of workflow technology and process-aware information systems. Okay, this is the only slide that's full of statistics. And it's really to drive home the point that this is an important problem and there's a way to characterize it. First of all, 50% of all healthcare errors are due to slips and lapses, such as not executing some intended and interrupted action. This is called prospective memory. So prospective memory is when you say, I need to do something next or eventually, and you intend to do it. And then later you remember that you intend to do it, and then you do it. Well, obviously, if you forget to do it, that can be a problem. Almost 50% of interruptions affect direct care tasks. About 50% of pages to physicians interrupt direct patient care. And almost 50% of pages are non-urgent. So you've got almost 50% of pages non-urgent, and they are causing interruptions which can lead to healthcare errors. And these errors may be serious in terms of outcomes, but they also have dramatic impact on patient experience. So, well, they forgot me, they forgot about this, or this took too long. Those affect patient experience, and that's the system behind the smiles. So over the last couple of decades, I've noticed that whenever there's a big sort of societal problem, someone will eventually get around, so the problem is called X, and someone will write a book called The X Prescription. You know, how are we going to solve the problem? Well, I often tweet this picture of the workflow prescription. And so what is the workflow prescription? Well, let's start with what is workflow. I have seen literally hundreds of definitions of workflows over the 2 or 3 decades that I've been interested in the topic. And I have seen definitions that would span 2 PowerPoint slides and use tiny font. Now, the very simplest is simply a series of steps. I like this definition. It's mine. And it is, workflow is a series of steps consuming resources, that's cost, and achieving a goal, that's benefit. So let's break it down. Series of steps, tasks, activities. So they're called different things. If you're an anthropologist and you go into someone's home and you are diagramming their life flows, and they create process maps when they're trying to understand how folks, for example, are using various products, they may not call them tasks, they may call them activities. Consuming resources or costs. So these costs are not just the healthcare system's costs, but these are the patient's money, attention, and time costs. And then you've got goals. These are the benefits, costs and benefits. Workflows exist in an economic environment. When that economic environment changes, the workflows need to change. However, there are many reasons why it's difficult to change healthcare workflows in the ways that would maximize the ROI, maximize the benefit-cost ratio. By the way, process and workflow are often used synonymously, not always, and the meaning is usually clear from context. Okay, so that was workflow. What is workflow technology? Generally, informally speaking, any technology that intentionally facilitates workflow is workflow technology. But narrowly, technically, if you're a sort of a workflow professional, workflow technology person, workflow technology involves models of work. These models of work are executable, meaning a computer program can look at that model and execute it just like some computer code, just like an if-then or case statement. And the models can be of work or workflow. Workflow tends to be sequences of things. Work tends to be hierarchies of goals. Consultable means these models can be understood and consulted by a human so that you can look at it and inspect it and say, oh, I see what the status of this task is, or I see what needs to change in the design of the work or the workflow. Consultable also means by the computer, because even if it's not executing the model, the computer may use some model of work to interpret, for example, analytics. These models can usually be visually represented. So in the business process management industry, you have lots of systems that allow you to draw workflow diagrams, and you turn a crank and an application comes out. So instead of writing Java, C#, and mumps code, you draw the workflows. But this also, workflow technology also includes calendar systems where non-programmers are creating rules that are running against the calendars to route messages and to escalate, and also dynamic checklists. So checklists are big in healthcare, but if you implement those checklists in such a way that all of the items are smart and they can detect which things have to occur in a different order, that's an example of workflow technology too. So, what's the difference between workflow technology and information technology? Well, information technology certainly influences workflow. Every piece of software has, quote, workflow. But my mother, who was an English teacher, drilled into me the difference between affect and effect. Affect means to influence something, maybe positively, maybe negatively. And some software makes workflow better in healthcare, some software does not. Workflow tech is intentionally designed to effect workflow. That is, it drives workflow. It pushes tasks to the right person, checks to make sure that they're done, and so forth. So it's kind of like Jean-Luc Picard in Star Trek saying, make it so. That's workflow technology. Here's another difference. Information technology in health IT often includes workflow. Well, what does that mean for workflow to be hard-coded? It means that after you compile the program in the software factory back at the vendor, and then you send it out and it starts to execute, all of its behaviors are already inside the program. They're already compiled down. It doesn't consult much in its environment when it executes. Soft-coded software, such as workflow technology, soft codes workflow. So as the program executes, instead of just consulting some value that's hard coded into the program, it reaches out into a database or reaches out into the environment. And at runtime, this changes the order of things. This changes the business logic. And so people who aren't programmers, people who aren't Java, C# folks can change the workflow behavior after you implement the system. So it's important to get the folks in the workflow, the clinicians and so forth, involved in the design at all aspects, not just before you implement, but even after you implement it. But in order for that to be true, the software has to soft code workflow so that those changes can be tweaked after the implementation. So, what is structured messaging, which is an example of workflow technology? Well, you pre-build these message structures, and you can think of these message structures as kind of like simplified forms that folks are very familiar with in healthcare. You send that securely over the internet. And these messages can occur in strings, back and forth, conversations. These are the workflows. These are the steps, tasks, activities. Because you are using the same set of structures over and over again, same message types over and over again, folks become familiar with them. And so when one arrives, they know exactly where to look to find the information they need, if the workflows and the forms are designed correctly, which they can be because you can change them even after you've implemented. All of this familiarity leads to both speed and accuracy. Speed is important because the faster you interact, the more throughput you can get. For example, if it takes, instead of 4 hours from beginning to end of a workflow, from beginning to end of a case, if you move that to 2 hours, you've effectively doubled your capacity. Accuracy, it's more consistent, and because you can track the task status, you can make sure that nothing languishes or fails to be done. This combination of structured data and structured workflow facilitates automation through workflow technology. Okay, The three major components, pieces of structured messaging in a calendar model are forms. These are the forms that I just talked about. You're sending these forms out, and instead of people having to type a lot of text and then to remember what it is they need to type, and then they have to look at it and they have to interpret it, because it is structured. You have what's called recognition memory instead of retrieval memory. So retrieval memory, you have to remember what to create. In recognition memory, you have an enumerated list of possibilities, and you choose whichever one you recognize to be correct. So it might be yes, no, please ask me again when I get back to the office, that sort of thing. Then you have the calendar. Shared mental models are so important for team behavior. And if you've ever talked to someone about your calendar, even though there's no calendar in front of them and there's no calendar in front of you, there's calendars in both of your heads. They're like virtual calendars, and they're actually you're using it as a shared mental model to talk about whether you can meet up or not. Well, shared mental models need to be shared not just among the humans, they also need to be shared with the software. So it needs to be at high enough level that the humans can understand it, but low enough level that the workflow engine can consult it. And a calendar is an ideal model for that. And then you've got the rules. So the rules are proactively watching for certain conditions to happen. So someone needs some care, and you check in the calendar, you see who's available. If they're not available, you use a rule to route it to the backup, and then you check later to see if they answered, and if not, you escalate. Those are the rules. So forms, calendars, and rules. So this is kind of a pictorial representation of that. On the left, we've got the calendar. This is the shared mental machine model. On the right, we have these forms, and these forms aren't just about text. They can also contain images, audio, and these rules and these forms, the user interface and the workflow is soft-coded. So that means that once you you implement it, folks who aren't programmers can change the workflow behaviors. All right, what are the major benefits of structured workflow? Number one, automaticity. Because you have a workflow engine, and it's in the software, instead of a human workflow engine, it's a software workflow engine, it can recognize and be triggered and do things without manual human intervention. Although this can be overridden. So if the workflow engine consults a rule and sends you something, and maybe someone didn't code something right, you can always say, well, no, that doesn't apply to me. And if you don't, then there are fallback rule business logic. Then you have transparency. Because every task goes through the workflow engine, that means the task is both time-stamped and the workflow engine keeps track of the status. Okay, is it pending? Is it in process? Has it been completed? Is it languishing? Has it been forwarded to someone else? Has it errored out? Has it been canceled? All this information is available, and it can be viewed by the members of the team. They can see, okay, I see this task in our group, and Joe, who usually does it, didn't do it, so I guess I'll have to do it. It can be the workflow status can be viewed in reports by the supervisor, so they can say, okay, show me all the outstanding tasks that have languished more than 5 minutes, and they can be seen by the administrators who are keeping the system running well. It is this task transparency that allows you to compensate for interruptions. So instead of a human saying, oh, I need to do this later, and they forget, the workflow engine knows that you haven't done it, and it can remind you. So, flexible. Workflow engines don't just do what workflow engines do, they consult these workflow rules. These workflow rules are out there in the environment. They can be changed by the administrators and the supervisors. They tell the workflow engine what to do. They're soft-coded. Therefore, when you change them, the workflows change. When you put together transparency and flexibility, you arrive at improvability. Because you've got this timestamp task data out there, you can use it using a variety of tools to find and eliminate bottlenecks, rework or redundancies, doing things over and over again. And this can be used to both to improve cycle time, reduce the workflow from 4 hours to 2 hours and double your capacity, and increase consistency. That is, vastly increase the likelihood that the task will eventually be accomplished within a certain window of time. Now, those are kind of essential aspects of architecture, but you also have to be concerned about these sort of value added on. So it's not just text in the form, you also have voice, images, radiology images, for example. Then you need to be able to convert. So if you try one channel by voice and they don't respond, well, maybe you need to text them. You need to, as is the case with many add-ons today, you've got to integrate with EHR. That's happening. So particularly with tasks that happen in the EHR may need to cause things to propagate out through the structured messaging system. Of course, you need HIPAA compliance. And then there's cross-platform. Because these systems are sending data to either Android or iOS or the desktop, you have the option to use your own device. That's the bring your own device phenomenon. And then finally, this may seem redundant. So why am I mentioning intelligent message routing and escalation again? Well, you want content. So just like pick lists of drugs and codes are content, workflows are content too. So when you get that structured messaging system, you want to have a set of routing and escalation workflows already sort of, other people have been using them, they work great, and then they work great for you. You don't have to create them from scratch, and you can tweak them further. Okay, here's a thought experiment. I think what Einstein called a Gedanken experiment. And that is, what if, take a time machine back 10 years ago, what if we had started automating workflow instead of data? What an absurd idea. I mean, how is that possible? Don't we have to have all this data? Well, in fact, I've done some consulting internationally, and there are a lot of companies that have watched what has happened in the United States over the last couple of decades. And they've kind of, just like in the model of you skip the telephone poles and go directly to, satellite phones, some of them are saying, what we need to do is understand the workflows first, and then only gather the data we need to accomplish the workflows. So today, we have all this data and all these databases. Basically, EHRs are kind of databases with UIs slapped on them. Okay, we have all this data, and people are saying, well, I don't want all this data, I want actionable data. Well, whenever you hear the word actionable data, think workflow technology. This is consistent with the famous advice from Covey, 1989, begin with the end in mind. This is exactly the way industrial engineers are trained. What you do, you go into the factory, you figure out, here is the product in the box that's being sent to someone. Now we work backwards. So this is down at the bottom here, we have data, which is a very important resource. It costs money to obtain it. It costs money to stick it into the workflow. And then on the right here, we have goals and benefits, and that's the end in mind. And we're trying to lay down across all of this data a whole bunch of workflows to take advantage of it. If we had done it differently, we would have done it this way. We would have started with the end in mind. We would have said, what is the penultimate step before the end? And what is the data that we need? And then you say, well, what is the step before that? And what is the data we need? And then, you finally get to where you are or where you typically would be. But instead, what we have is this situation. We've got all of these databases out there. We're collecting all of this data at the point of care, and we're trying to lay down on top of it a set of workflows to take advantage of it. And so it's a lot harder to lay down all this patchwork workflow, kind of whole cloth, without following that end to, start model. So, what order makes sense? I'd argue adding data to workflow, but we're kind of stuck right now with adding workflow to data. That means we need extremely flexible workflow technology to adapt to lay down to compensate for and take advantage of all of this existing data investment. And this is an excellent argument for structured messaging, for example, as a platform. A platform is a set of constraints and resources that you can just count on, and you can, when you're building some other system on top. And that is the workflow platform that I believe in the next 5 years, we're going to see dramatic investments in a variety of workflow platforms kind of laid down on top of the data systems we have in place, and structured messaging is one of them. All right, I could have drawn these diagrams, but I wanted something a little more vivid. So you may recognize some of the folks there in the lower left. We got Dr. Nick, Colin, and John Lynn. And so that's a drawing of the relationship between patient experience and patient engagement. Now, I showed you an excellent definition of experience rather, and also there are definitions of engagement out there that use words like activation. But as a systems engineer, as an industrial engineer, I look at it in terms of experience is what the system does to the patient, and engagement is what the patient does back. Okay, because you really, when you're building systems, you need to really simplify. But now we're adding technology in there, and this technology is interacting with the staff in the healthcare system. If this technology helps them do their job, then they do a better job interacting with the patient. If this technology does a good job, and it does it in a way that frees them from a lot of work they had to do before, it frees up time and attention that can be spent on creating wonderful experience. That's the smiles. At the same time this is happening, we have a consumerization process. A lot of the younger generation, they don't want to talk to anybody on the phone. They, God forbid, go someplace to deal with customer service. They just want to sit there in front of the TV and click on an app. And so what's happening is these back-end systems, the systems behind the smiles, are actually being exposed digitally to patients. This has interesting implications. It can free up the system, free up the staff to deliver better service. So basically, and again, this is like, I started at, the 30,000 foot level, I zoomed in, and now I'm zooming back out. And so I believe that workflow, including messaging, is absolutely essential to sort of creating an optimal set of relationships of data flows and workflows between the patient and the system or staff and technology. Okay. Several decades ago, when I got my master's, one in industrial engineering focusing on workflow, and the other in medical informatics focusing on data, I have watched this process happen. There's been a kind of a split. Sort of the data folks went one way and the workflow folks went the other way. Many of the early hospital information systems were actually designed by management engineers. Management engineers were industrial engineers. But what's happened in the last couple of decades is the medical informatics, health IT folks who are focused on data have built most of the systems that people interact with. While at the same time, the workflow folks have gone into total quality management, Six Sigma, lean, process improvement. And that's been a kind of an unfortunate chasm, because obviously these problems really require both kinds of expertise. I believe that workflow technology, what academics call process-aware information systems, is the window of opportunity to knit back together the workflows and the data of healthcare. And structured messaging is an excellent example of a particular kind of workflow technology. Okay, we're really zooming out here. Something about that title, Wellness Through Workflow. Sounds like a public health announcement. Okay, wellness, the state of being in a good physical and mental health. Workflow, series of steps, consuming resources, achieving a goal. Well, think about the relationship between workflow technology in the outside of healthcare. A lot of the the apps that are making things very convenient, Google Now, Siri, are using various kinds of workflow technology supplemented by machine learning. And so not only can we reunite data and workflow, we can also unite, using workflow technology, we can unite healthcare workflows and non-healthcare workflows. So at the top of the hour, I hope you'll join. It tends to be kind of a free-for-all. Basically, even if you're not into workflow and patient experience, but you're interested in healthcare, health IT, we'd love you to join us. That's at ehr.biz/blab workflow. That'll take you to, it'll ask you to use your Twitter credentials to log in. And then just at the top of the hour, Jimmy Vanagan, a general internist, a guy who's waving right there, is co-host. And I'd love to hear what you think about what I've said or just about anything else. And thank you. That's my Gmail address, chuckwebster@md. But the best way to get a hold of me is on Twitter, whereflow. And be sure to, everybody, start using that PowHit hashtag. People and organizations improving workflow with health information technology. And then join our blab at the top of the hour. And by the way, Chrome, and I hear Firefox works. I always use Chrome. There is an iOS app. Chrome on Android, I hear works. And thank you all for attending. And viva la workflow. Onward, workflowistas. Thank you.